Hello everyone. Today I want to spend a few minutes revisiting Psalm 23. You might ask why. Don't we already know this psalm backwards? Well, yes, probably. But like everything else in God's Word, it's always relevant, always fresh, and always has new truths to be uncovered. Psalm 23 was a favourite of my mother's and one of her choices at her funeral a couple of years back. I've been studying it recently, and I just want to share a few thoughts and notes that I've collated from these studies. There's way too much for the time we have, so I've tried to pick out some of the points that have especially blessed me, and I hope you'll find them helpful too. I'll read it through in the King James Version. That's how I learnt it as a child. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So verse 1, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. David immediately makes this very personal. The Lord is my shepherd. If he's a shepherd to no one else, he's my shepherd. He leads me, he watches over me, he protects me. Spurgeon said that before a man can truly say the Lord is my shepherd, he must first feel himself to be a sheep by nature. He must relate to a sheep in its foolishness, its dependency, and in the warped nature of its will. I shall not want. Another commentator suggests that David says I shall not want both as a declaration and as a decision. So I shall not want means all my needs are supplied by the Lord, my shepherd. It also means I decide to not desire more than what the Lord, my shepherd, gives. Verse 2, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. Philip Keller, in his book A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23, writes that sheep do not lie down easily and will not unless four conditions are met. Because they are timid, they won't lie down if they are afraid. Because they are social animals, they won't lie down if there is friction among the sheep. If flies or parasites trouble them, they won't lie down. And finally, if sheep are anxious about food or hungry, they won't lie down. Rest comes because the shepherd has dealt with fear, friction, flies, and famine. He leads me beside still waters. Why still waters? As I was studying this psalm, I asked myself this, and I thought this was simply adding to the calm, peaceful atmosphere of the picture. But when I looked it up, I discovered that a fast-flowing river is no good for sheep. In the 21st century, we're used to our lamb being wrapped in supermarket packaging, but a real sheep is wrapped in wool. And if a sheep goes down a slope to drink from raging waters, the water will splash over its front half. And what happens when wool gets wet? It gets very heavy. So the sheep is in danger of toppling into the water, and they're not good swimmers. So they need water, still water, where they can drink safely. Verse 3, he restores my soul, he leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And most commentators agree that restores, or in the NIV refreshes, is not really the best translation here. The Hebrew word shab means to cause to repent or cause to turn. So literally, he causes me to turn in a way that refreshes my soul. The implication being that when I'm going in the wrong path, he causes me to turn round and go in the right path. Sheep have a tendency to wander into the wrong paths, and so do we. We stray from our shepherd and get ourselves stuck. When this happens, we are hopeless at rescuing ourselves. We need our shepherd to find us and bring us back. So it turns out that Little Bo Peep was not written by a shepherd. Leave us alone and we won't come home. We need a search and rescue mission. Verse 4, Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Spurgeon again notes the use of the word walk. The believer does not quicken his pace when he comes to die, but still calmly walks with God. To walk indicates the steady advance of a soul which knows its road, knows its end, resolves to follow the path, feels quite safe, and is therefore calm and composed. He's not in a flurry. He doesn't run as though alarmed, nor stand still as though he would go no further. He is not confounded or ashamed, and therefore keeps to his old pace. Of the valley, Spurgeon points out that it is not the valley of death, but the valley of the shadow of death. Jesus has taken the full reality of death on himself in our place. Nobody's afraid of a shadow. Let us therefore not be afraid. I will fear no evil. He doesn't say there won't be any evil, but I will fear no evil. The worst evils of life are those which exist only in our imagination. If we had no troubles apart from real troubles, we wouldn't have a fraction of our present sorrows. The psalmist was cured of the disease of fearing. Why? For thou art with me. This is the joy of the Christian. Thou art with me. The little child out at sea in the storm is not frightened like all the other passengers. It sleeps on its mother's lap. It is enough for it that its mother is with it, and it should be enough for the believer to know that Christ is with him. And then your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, I'd never paid much attention to the rod and the staff. I suppose just assuming these kind of authenticate his shepherdhood. But again, when I looked into it, I learned that the staff was a long branch which the shepherd would cut from a tree in such a way that there'd be a shorter branch sprouting out near the top, forming a kind of hook. So if a sheep got lost and fell into the water, the shepherd would hook the sheep round the neck and literally pull it out of danger. That's the staff. The rod was a very heavy piece of wood, and often they would bash pieces of iron into it, which would stick out. And the psalmist says, this is comforting to me. One commentator puts it like this. Imagine you're walking through a remote area late at night, and all of a sudden you see an unknown figure walking towards you, and in one hand they have a huge staff with a hook on it, and in the other hand they are dragging behind them a huge wooden club with pieces of metal sticking out of it, and you can see them glinting in the moonlight. Is this a comforting picture? No, it isn't. However, suppose you're walking through the night and there's someone walking behind you and you don't know who it is. You're getting a bit nervous, and then you see someone walking towards you with a huge hooked stick in one hand and a club in the other. But as they get closer, you recognise that it's one of your best friends. That changes the picture. Because you're getting worried about what's going on behind you, and now someone's come along able to do something about it. That staff and rod are pretty comforting now. Your friends brought firepower to the party. That's the picture here. The shepherd will protect the sheep. The shepherd is more than able and more than equipped to protect and look after the sheep in his care. In verse 5, the imagery shifts, and instead of God as a good shepherd, we see God as a generous host, and the sheep become people. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. So a magnificent banquet is provided by a liberal and benevolent host who has not only the wherewithal to feed me, but the power to protect me. And though surrounded by enemies, I sit down to this table with confidence, knowing that I shall feast in perfect security. The phrase, in the presence of my enemies, is striking. The host's care and concern doesn't eliminate the presence of my enemies, but it enables the experience of God's goodness even in their midst. Nothing here is hurried. There's no confusion, no disturbance. The enemy's at the door, and yet God prepares a table and the Christian sits down and eats as if everything were in perfect peace. My cup runneth over. The Good Shepherd gives us not only our bare needs, but an abundance of them. And this is all of his free grace. We might ask ourselves, if God had filled our cup in proportion to our faith, how much would we have in our cup? And finally, verse 6, surely goodness and mercy, or goodness and love, shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. As I thought about this verse, I was drawn to the word follow. What does this mean? And I close by reading a short extract from a book I'm reading at the moment. Not a book about Psalm 23 at all, but this closing verse crops up in another context. Every time you leave the house, you are being followed. Wherever you run, you are being chased. Wherever you hide, you will be found. This pursuit is relentless and will never end. Now, that might sound disturbing, but look who's doing the following. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. David knows that he enjoys eternal security. He will dwell in God's house forever. But he also knows he enjoys present security each day in this life. Every day his Lord's goodness and love are following him wherever he goes. Here are two of the Bible's favourite words to describe God. Goodness refers to his unalloyed moral and relational beauty. Love denotes the loyalty, faithfulness and undeserved kindness God consistently shows towards his people. That is who is following you. And in fact, it's even stronger than that. Literally, David says that God's goodness and love will pursue him. It's actually the same Hebrew word that was used of Pharaoh chasing the Israelites as they escaped from Egypt in Exodus 14. God's goodness and love act like two sheepdogs running after us to keep us safe. This is a wonderful truth. The Bible often talks about the Christian life as one of following Jesus, but this psalm tells us that it is just as much about Jesus following us. You might have heard people say that faith is about our pursuit of God. Really, it's about God's pursuit of us. Wherever you go, whatever you do, however you feel, and whatever scrapes you get yourself into, if the Lord is your shepherd, then his goodness and love will be on your tail every step of the way. So may God grant us the grace to dwell in the serene atmosphere of this most blessed psalm.